no good. Rebounded by Anthony. 2 seconds left. Anthony for the win. Got it! Rolls it! Cole Anthony gives the Magic a victory.
Close Up Magic.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Close Up Magic. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron, and today we got a really fun episode. We got Aaron Goldstone, formerly of Orlando Magic Pinstripe Post. We'll get into more about why I said formerly in a second if you don't already know. But we're really psyched to talk about some Magic today, the rest of the season, and just some other news that's come along the last couple of weeks. Before we get into that, just going to hit the housekeeping notes. If you want to financially support the show, you can do so by picking up some merch, such as this hat or a t-shirt, whatever you want. There's a link in our show description. You can also check out our Patreon program. Those are both great options to support the show if that's what you want to do. No pressure. We're thankful if you'd even consider it. The other thing I want to shout out is our network, 19 Media Group. They support us really well, and we're thankful for them. And then last thing, if you enjoy the show, do one last thing for me. Hit subscribe on that YouTube. Like and subscribe. Leave 5 stars on any audio platforms you're listening to. It really helps us in the search bar. Appreciate y'all listening and tuning in. I'm just going to bring Aaron up right now. We're going to get right into it. Aaron, what's going on, man? Good evening. Thanks for staying up late for me. How you doing?
Hey, Steven. How are you? Thanks so much again for having me on. It's been, I think, it's been a bit. I think last summer is the last time I checked in with you and your show as we were preparing last year for the draft and kind of some pre-draft thoughts on the whole Paulo and Jabari Smith and Chet Holmgren debate. I believe that was the last time I was on the show, so I'm really happy to be back. Yeah,
it's probably been a little too long, but that was the last time you've been on, and that was a good conversation, and I'm psyched we're going to have another good one tonight. Aaron, before we get into the Magic basketball aspect of this, and this is still kind of related, I kind of teased it in the intro, which you heard. You used to be with Orlando Pinstripe Post, and maybe still kind of are, but things have changed with that company as the big parent company that owns Fansided and all those organizations. They unfortunately have been hit with what a lot of companies are with right now and had to do layoffs, which unfortunately affected OPP. From my perspective, OPP is one of the OG blogs and coverage sites of the Magic, a group and an organization that I followed for a long time from. I got a little bit more involved in following you guys actually kind of around the time when the podcast started like 5 years ago with like Preston and Zach and you were on it as well. But I know OPP's been around for a long time. You wrote a beautiful article kind of summarizing where things were at, where you're going and whatnot. I just want to give you the opportunity to kind of like address some of that here on the podcast. Just because I don't know if every listener of this show has actually read that article. So long story less long, like what was all this? What was this transition like for you?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction as well. So Vox Media is, like you said, the parent company that oversees all the SB Nation, team sites, including the one that I wrote for, Orlando Pinstripe Post, and they've made some pretty significant layoffs to a lot of their sites. A few weeks ago, it was very kind of abrupt, and there was no real warning or anything like that. Although you kind of always in this industry know that could be something around the corner, just if you sort of read the room and see what's going on out there. Orlando Pinstripe Post kind of caught up in that. And so basically the website is still in operation, but the company said that they weren't going to financially support, pay any of the writers any longer. I mentioned in the farewell article that you previewed, I mentioned that, I'm not trying to act like I got paid a lot really ever to do this. It was, always kind of a hobby that turned into a second job. But, I do live in Daytona Beach, which, geographically is about 65 miles from Orlando. And so it was a little bit, not too bad, but a little bit of a hike to drive to cover games.
Absolutely.
And so at a bare minimum, being paid, monthly to cover gas and expenses and things like that, was important to me and things like that. And, I could always cover games from home, watching it on TV or something, but I feel like true, authentic coverage and kind of next level stuff, really involved being there and being there for like Coach Mosley's pregame and being there to see guys work out on the court, before the game and stuff that you don't necessarily see on TV. And so I guess I had a decision to make, and some of the writers that write for our site, we had a decision to make. Do we keep writing and finish out the year? And do we kind of just stop cold turkey? What I really kind of thought about is just the industry and the writers that actually do this for a living, that are out there, fighting and grinding and struggling. And so I kind of felt like it was almost not like inappropriate, but maybe in bad taste to work for free, because whenever you're doing something like that, you're kind of just devaluing the really good work that other people, put out there. And so I made a decision that I thought was best for me, which was just to kind of take a break, for the rest of the year, to not continue to put content out, without being compensated. And again, like I said, it wasn't that I get paid a lot of money, but it was just sort of a principled thing. And I was disappointed. I've been writing for Orlando Pinstripe Post since 2017, so it's been a good, little bit, and it was something, that I've taken a lot of pride in, that I've met a lot of really great people and had some amazing experiences doing, and I've put my heart and soul into putting stuff out there for fans, because I was a fan as well, and so it's disappointing, especially with the team kind of turning a corner, and there's so many exciting days ahead, but. It might be temporary. It might be forever. Who knows? It's all kind of happening, fast and in real time. And so, we'll see what happens.
I can totally get where you're coming from. Particularly like when you think of it, like it's not like you were approached by a small blog that is offering, hey, we're giving you an opportunity to be with us, but there's no pay, right? This is someone who used to employ you to a degree, in a financial way, and having to make that decision to work for free at that point is kind of crossing some roads there. And I've in a different industry, I've dealt with that at one point too, where I'm employed by someone, then they want me to do things for free, and that just leaves, it's just kind of a weird taste. And so and I ultimately made the same decision you did, and I just can see how that would be a challenging spot for you too. Now, as a person, you have now gone from viewing the team from, I believe you said 2017 or 18 was when you started with OPP, as a media, right? And having to kind of look at things through a specific lens. But now you are transitioning to watch the team and view the team as a fan, which you were before you started covering the team. How has that impacted you so far recently, just in the last month since all this has happened?
Yeah, I mean, when you're watching games from home and you can sit on the couch and have a nice adult beverage and kind of relax, it totally is a different experience, because like if you're there covering the game, it really is kind of a grind and it moves fast, and there's not a lot of times you look up from your computer or just kind of take in your surroundings. Like I would try to get as much of like the game recap written as it was happening as possible, and then after the game you've got interviews and there's time crunches and you're trying to throw in some quotes, and again, I had to drive home and travel and then, work at my full-time job early in the morning. And so everything was just kind of down to a science for me as far as time schedule and things like that. But it became very regimented and not necessarily the pleasurable like fan experience as you get when you step back and you don't feel like you have to necessarily produce and write, and you can just kind of take the game in and, rewind, that was a pretty good highlight, or like, oh my God, did you see that shot or move, or just kind of have fun with it and don't feel like it's necessarily something that, you have to produce a thought on every single play or outcome and just kind of take it all in and enjoy a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like you view things differently? I mean, outside of like, game day coverage versus, at home, just what, like, do you feel like you have like emotionally like looked at the team differently now that now that you're a fan?
Honestly, not really yet. I mean, it's still early,
Sure.
I can still see that coming, but I kind of understand what you're asking. And I referenced that sort of in my farewell, article as well, is, when you are a fan, obviously the word fan is short for fanatical. And sometimes you get overly emotional or invested in certain outcomes or players or things that you're obviously passionate about. And so when you're covering a team and you put all that other stuff aside, sometimes you try to produce things in more of a level-headed or rational way. Whereas in a fan, you can get caught up in stuff, and there's really nothing stopping or preventing me from kind of falling back into that a little bit, because that's part of it. Like, I'm a huge New York Mets fan, and so for baseball, like during baseball season, which is much more of a time investment to watch that many games, and they're so long, but I get very kind of over exaggerated and emotional about the highs and lows of the New York Mets, which can kind of give you a preview into my mental state. But that's part of it as a fan, right? I mean, that's part of what's fun about following a team and stuff like that. And so I could definitely see myself getting back into that a little bit. Like, I grew up in Central Florida, and so when I was in middle school, like that was right along the time of like Shaq and Penny and Horace Grant. And like I had like a different jersey for every day of the week I could wear to school. And then when I was just coming out of college and I was still, in my early 20s and living in Orlando, that was the Dwight and, Stan Van Gundy and Jameer and Rashard and, Turkoglu years. And so, those kind of years you can look back and be like, yeah, I was pretty fanatical. But then, recently I've just kind of been just focused on working. You go there, you go to Amway, you cover the team, and you're surrounded by so many professionals, and it's a job, and you don't have time to like get caught up in other stuff other than just being fair and balanced, out of the respect again for the people you're working with that are grinding. It's such a grind.
No, I hear that. I think that there's, I've been doing this podcast for 5 or 6 seasons now, and I now have a daughter, which I didn't before. And, which just being real, like, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to, who knows if I'll even do this in 2 or 3 seasons from now. Right. And there is, as much as I love doing this show, there's also an excitement to one day taking a level off of my investment in the team, and just being invested as a fan and not someone who's trying to talk about the team on a weekly basis. And, at least in the format that I am doing it. It just, I don't know. It almost is like a slight pressure gets removed when I start thinking about when this program transitions and I'm no longer a part of that. If people who are listening, I'm not quitting this show, not anytime soon, but I'm just talking like long-term when fatherhood becomes a bigger priority, like not priority, it is a priority, but y'all know what I'm saying. Aaron, I can relate to your transition that you're going through in a sense where I think about that in an aspect of my life too. But let's start talking about this actual team now. First off, before that, I just want to say, like, you did great work. I really appreciated what you wrote and the dedication that you had from your draft coverage, from your game day coverage, jumping on this podcast over the years. And, back when you all had a podcast, going in your investment in that, and just the whole OPP crew for the last, however many years it's been around, for a very long time. Just shout out to you all and that crew. You all did some great work, and hopefully one day it can come back, because it's a good platform that I know has a deep following in history with the Orlando Magic community. Cool. Now let's get into the show.
Yeah.
As far as the Magic. Yeah, man. Dude, so we're on All-Star break. We're recording this Tuesday, February 21st. The Magic play in a couple of days versus the Pistons. Kind kind of like the big stuff that's happened in the last couple of weeks, and we've talked about some of it. The trade deadline, we had Mo Bamba get moved to the Lakers, essentially for a second round pick, and some cash to offset the buyout of Patrick Beverley. We bought out Terrence Ross and we waived RJ Hampton. Ross went to the Suns. RJ is in the process of signing with the Detroit Pistons when he clears waivers. And then we signed Goga, someone, I can't remember his last name off the top of my head, so don't be offended, Magic fans. I've just not really heard of the guy too much. Overall, just like, what were your thoughts and expectations of the trade deadline and like versus like kind of what actually happened?
Yeah, I was maybe like on the margins a little bit surprised in a couple of the moves and not surprised in a couple of the others, starting, I guess, with the veteran Terrence Ross. He was going into free agency next summer, he was in the last year of a deal. And, I remember a few times in the past, Jeff Wellman mentioning, after Vooch was traded and AG was traded and Evan was traded, that, Terrence was left holding the bags. It always kind of reminded me of like the Will Smith meme in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when everybody had moved out and he was just kind of in the living room with, just the rug and all the furniture had been moved out. But, he always kind of thought that in the right time and place when it was appropriate that he would do right by Terrence and find him a spot where he could be comfortable as a veteran. And it took a little bit longer than maybe, some people thought, but it worked out, at this point. Because, again, he's a veteran on the last year of his deal, and you're not going to get anything for him, if you're thinking about trade value on somebody that can be signed to probably close to maybe the veteran minimum in next summer. And so it's like, what team's going to fork over, a young player or a draft pick or an asset? So, it was always going to be, for me, I thought either like a heavily, heavily protected second round pick or just, he was a prototypical buyout candidate, which is what ended up happening. And, he is a West Coast guy. He's from Portland, Oregon, and played college, at Washington. And so he gets to move a little bit closer back to home playing for Phoenix. And I think that's a good, move. And, those kind of little moves may seem insignificant, but the Magic front office is all about doing right by players and making those kind of long-term investments with agents and management. Okay, back in the day, I did this for Terrence Ross. Maybe you have another client in the future that, it's a reputation, people talk in the business. And so, that one for me was not unexpected. I was a little surprised, not that the Magic decided to trade Mo Bamba because he had fallen out of the rotation and his backup center minutes were going to Mo Wagner. But I was a little bit surprised with the return, especially with Beverly, being, an obvious buyout and waive candidate. You're essentially just giving Mo Bamba up for free, or a second round pick. And
not like a salary dump.
Yeah. And it was like, well, I guess going back to last summer, some people were surprised that the Magic decided to bring Mo Bamba back. But as soon as the contract figures were released, oh man, it was a tradable, movable salary right in that margin of like $10 million where those deals are not too difficult to move anymore. And so it always kind of seemed like bringing Mo Bamba back was just a long-term plan to eventually move him. It's just they moved him without really, getting anything back. And so I hate to bring up the fact that he was a former, top 10 pick, because when you sign your second contract in the league, that kind of stuff is sort of, over. And so he was a backup center that had fallen out of the rotation, but he really hadn't been playing that bad this year, at least offensively. Does it hurt the Orlando Magic right now, the 2022-23 version that they moved Mo Bamba? No. But it still, to me, was a little surprising that they moved him thinking about what they got back. You could always make that deal in the summer during the draft. You could always make that deal in the summer during free agency. You could always make that deal next year, the trade deadline. I was kind of, again, wondering if maybe they just did that for Mo to get him somewhere else. And that one was a little interesting.
I agree with that too. And it just like, I was a little annoyed. Not that there's anything wrong with like Patrick Beverley coming back, but just like basically just trying to like, I mean, I just was hoping not, I didn't expect this massive return, right? And ultimately I didn't expect them to like add anything to Mo Bamba to like make it even more incentivized. But like you said, they could have done this deal in the summer. They could have done it in the draft. His next year's contract's not guaranteed either. So it's like there's multiple ways they could have gone about this to see if something else. And I hadn't thought about did they do him a favor until you just mentioned it, and maybe they did. I know he's not like a part of like a huge agency. His friend Gear Love is his agent, and I'm not sure if they represent anyone else, but at least I think so. Maybe he's his manager. Maybe they're the same thing. I don't know. But regardless, like it was just kind of disappointing a little bit. Not that I was expecting the world to come back, but it was just very underwhelming, especially when you consider like the Magic have buttloads of second round picks. So I was hoping like maybe to at least get a player that was like on contract for another season that could potentially be of value. I don't know. Just was weird. I think you were about to bring up RJ Hampton, who had kind of a late wave. He just got waived today. And last summer, to give some like context to listeners, the Magic front office decided to not pick up his 4th year option. And he had like a horrible training camp, or not training camp. He had a horrible summer league. I'm not sure how he looked at training camp, but like during that training camp preseason process is when they decided not to pick up his, if my memory serves correctly, his 4th year option. And Aaron, maybe I was seeing stuff, but when he was actually on the court this year, he actually looked pretty darn good in most of his situations. Like he's definitely taken a step and shown some growth, but maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. Maybe he was just as horrible as he was the last 2 years when he got on the court this year. But then we had those situations where like the Magic literally didn't have a point guard or a shooting guard for like certain sections of time, like, very minimal depth there when everyone was injured. Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz. And they're playing two-way guys, Kevon Harris over RJ Hampton. There's been nights when Caleb Houston, who was just drafted in the second round, got prioritized. And to me, like, it's not overly shocking once we realized they didn't pick up his option and didn't see him a part of the future. But I think it definitely stung a lot to Magic fans to not only see his option not get picked up, but also to then see him like basically be treated to the bottom of the bottom and like having two-way players playing over him. What are your thoughts? Because I know you have a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Steven, I think that was I'm right there with you. You kind of shared everything that I was going to kind of mention. So let me try to. I
didn't mean to. I apologize. No. I was just trying to backstory it.
Yeah, I think I could add a few there, but you're absolutely right. Like I was going to take it back to last summer. It's kind of shocking when you think about it because you very rarely in the NBA see guys on a rookie contract not get that 3rd or 4th year picked up. Magic fans will remember that's what happened at the last, days of Mario Hezonja as his 4th year option did not get picked up as well. But, when you do that, I mean, you're talking about a rookie contract with a guy picked in the 20s where RJ's salary was going to be like, I don't know, like a very minuscule percentage of the overall salary cap. And it's just kind of hard to find those guys. And he's still in his, early 20s. And you decide to just kind of go in a different direction without even giving him that 4th year. You've already kind of sealed the deal ahead of time that this guy, has no future with the team. And so now when it comes to the trade deadline, again, what team is going to give up anything, like any kind of young player with a comparable contract, any kind of asset for someone that you could just get for free in the summer, sign them. So why give up anything to the Orlando Magic to get him? And so when you don't pick up his option in the summer, I agree with you, you're basically just kind of waiving him at that point. What kind of future do you have? I mean, I guess you could play for a prove-it deal or something like that. But, this was always going to happen, I think, to somebody on the Orlando Magic. When you have 10 guys on the roster that are 25 years old or younger. There's going to be somebody that was left out in the fold. Just because I think the Magic and we can get into this, are at a point now where it's not as important anymore drafting for the future and collecting these assets. I think now, even more importantly, they've got to figure out who they already have, which guys are going to be, your keepers that you could build around and give out second or third contracts to and really kind of settle in with your nucleus and your core. And I think they have a pretty good idea who those guys are, but there's some people like on the outer edges and the margins they have to figure out, is this somebody that has a future with the team? And
Sure.
And for RJ, unfortunately, he didn't really have a chance this year to play into Orlando Magic's future because they didn't pick up his fourth-year option, and he was always kind of battling an uphill fight. He did volunteer to go to Summer League when a lot of his other counterparts did not, to play with guys like Paulo and Caleb. He did volunteer to go down to Lakeland to get more consistent minutes when he wasn't playing. And so he was saying the right things and doing the right things. And, he has, I think, maybe I was just saying things. I don't know. I think he did improve a little bit. His shot, especially his perimeter shot from the corner looked, percentage-wise, pretty efficient this year.
His decision-making was improved a bit with his passing and less turnovers. His defense looked decent.
Yeah, and that's another thing you could kind of say. Since he's been with the Magic, for whatever reason, because of injuries to Markelle or situations here or there, he's always kind of played out of position. The Magic were trying to make him this on-ball, lead guard because he is very quick and athletic, and I think he's versatile defensively, but some of the situations early on they were putting RJ in, I don't think was probably what was best for RJ. He was such a young player in this league. And so to play him at point guard, which is arguably the most difficult position in the NBA to play, especially for a young player, that wasn't doing him a lot of favors when he probably should have been off the ball. And, when I see his athleticism, when I see, I think his defensive versatility and the ceiling he could have on that side of the ball when he's locked in and engaged, and with the shot slowly coming along, was it worthwhile to just kind of waive him and dump him? Probably not. I think going back to last summer, it was arguably poor asset management. But again, is that a decision that's going to affect Orlando Magic this year? Probably not, because, he wasn't in the rotation. Like you said, they were playing guys like Kevon Harris and Caleb Houston in front of them. And so it's okay, maybe you can question the front office's decision of the way they've handled RJ, but at some point, where was he ever going to get minutes and playing time if the roster was healthy? And so again, maybe this is another situation. I know the organization's very close with Mike Miller, that they did right by RJ and found a new home for him. Now that I just said that, does he still have Mike Miller as an agent or?
No. So what's really interesting
there, right?
is, literally right after they didn't pick up his option, it was then talked about that RJ dropped Mike Miller. That was when Wendell Carter signed with Mike Miller, and RJ signed. I'm not sure who he's with right now, but he's with another agency. So, but it could be, doing them a favor. I just I go back to, you made a good point. I want to start there before I take it back. You talked about when this team is healthy, where does he fit in the rotation? And I want to remind listeners of the show that, there's at the point guard position, there's Fultz and Cole ahead of him on the depth chart there. On the wing position, you have Suggs, who they just heavily invested in. You have Franz, who is clearly not going anywhere. And then they just drafted Paulo at the wing as well. And then, so those guys are locked in. Then you have Gary Harris, who he's been pretty healthy, this year and a decent amount last season. And he's looked really good and clearly a very good, basketball player for this Magic team. And to an extent, a key part of their success, as the fifth option, good defender, hitting open threes, and then they just drafted Caleb Houston, who is like a 6'7" wing, that is a really good shooter and a fairly decent defender already at such a young age. And so like when this team is healthy, and 2 second-round potential first-round picks and $23 million in cap space. You add all that together, where is RJ's future with this team? And you had mentioned that, like, where does he fit in? He doesn't. And so, like, I think, you also mentioned, like, this was kind of probably always going to happen to an extent. But I want to, like, touch back on the trade itself. There's some people online that have been, like, vocal about, they just let go the most key part of the trade. And I don't really think that you can view this and think it like the trade was bad in itself. Cause I do think like you got a young player, you got a veteran in Gary Harris, who has turned into a retained asset, retained player. And you still have a first round pick coming. Like not every pick is going to hit. Not every trade is going to be 100%. It is just interesting though that they brought in RJ, I think like twice for workouts in pre-draft. And so I don't know. I just bringing that all together is it's still just a weird story, and it kind of sucks to see it play out the way it did. But I hope he does well in Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about his rookie year and when that trade happened at the trade deadline, and then fast forward a couple months. RJ Hampton won Rookie of the Month in the NBA that last month of the season in April. And so, very different circumstances. The Magic were putting out a pretty poor lineup at that point, and we're obviously focused on the draft and wanted to see what they had in their young players. And so it wasn't necessarily, I'm not a big fan of saying, that doesn't matter, those were fake stats or whatever. But, obviously the Magic weren't fully focused on winning when they were giving RJ that kind of usage. But my point is, like, he belongs in the NBA somewhere. You could even see at an early part of his career at that point that if he plays regular minutes and stuff like that, I don't know, like, if he's ready to step in and play major minutes on like a championship level team, but like he's good enough to be in the NBA. Like this is not the last time people will hear from RJ Hampton. He's just too athletic. I remember in the draft, watching him play and stuff like that. And it was like, okay, his shot is always going to be a question. Will ever come around? But like, he was one of the fastest and most athletic people that I'd ever scouted before. And so when you have that run and jump, NBA athleticism, when everybody's an elite athlete and you're even like above that, then you're always going to have a chance, so if he continues, he's so young still. If he continues to develop a shot, I think Detroit's a good landing spot for him right now because they're still very much in rebuilding mode. And so he'll have some minutes with Cade Cunningham out for the year. He'll have some minutes there, you would think. And then we'll go from there. But I think RJ Hampton's still going to have a long career in the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think he's going to be in the league for a little while. It's too soon. He's got too much, just raw talent to continue. And in my opinion, he did improve. Aaron, you talked about, some of the other aspects of this team that this front office is going to have to start figuring out. We kind of know who the core is, at least the majority of it, but now there's some players on the edges. The remainder of the season, who are some of the key players that you think the Magic have to make decisions on, or really that you're just also like interested in seeing how they fit and play into certain situations? Easily the first player that comes to my mind is Chuma Okeke. Because I still think, even though it seems like he's been around in Orlando forever, I still think the front office is kind of waiting for Chuma to get comfortable to really see what they have in him. Obviously it was well documented that he had that significant knee injury in college and he missed his first year, as a pro. And so he was already kind of a year behind, and that first year, it was a veteran team with Vooch and Terrence Ross and Fournier. And Chuma was kind of the talk of the roster, how he was such a mature rookie and he, moved the ball and was versatile and played defense and was really going to help the team. And then he had an injury in preseason and camp last year that really set him back the first couple months of the season, had a horrible shooting slump coming out the gate and then finished the season strong. And, this year he's kind of been in and out and then eventually out for a while for a month or two with that knee hiccup. And so you're looking for consistency from Chuma. You're looking for health. You're looking for just a steady role.
And since he's been gone, now Jonathan Isaac's back.
Yeah.
And now Bol has kind of carved out a little bit of a role. And so, not only am I for the rest of the season looking, at Chuma as far as, will you be on the Magic for your second contract? But I'm looking at him as far as like where in the right now, not in the future, but in the immediate last 25 games of the season, where are you going to find minutes?
Right.
You're going to have to come in and play well pretty much right away after a long layoff just to justify being on the floor over, some of these other guys that have emerged.
I kind of view with the rotation aspect of it, not so much like contracts and like long-term, but just like fit. I kind of view him and Caleb Houston to an extent as gigantic question marks, because when you think like, not only does this front office have 2 first-round picks, but they also have massive cap space this summer and could get even more if they really wanted to. They have $23 million, could potentially get up to like $33 million if they wanted to, or 32, somewhere around there. Don't quote me exact numbers, but around 30-ish. If they choose to. I doubt they will get to that point because I think they're pretty invested in Gary Harris, but they have a lot of options. So when you think that this team is going to try and likely take the next step in their playing, and be a playoff team next year, it's like, yeah, where does Chuma and Caleb fit? But then when you think about it, like, what does this team need? They need shooting. In theory, Chuma is a shooter. He's had some good stretches, for the most part been a little inconsistent since college, but he is supposed to be a pretty good shooter from deep, and can, pretty good team help defender and even some point of attack defense. He's a good defender, in theory. And then you got Caleb Houston, who is also a really good shooter. I think he's shooting like 38, 39% for the season so far, and his limited minutes off the bench after often not playing multiple games in a row, which can be hard to find consistency when you don't have a consistent role. And then, he's looked decent. Obviously he's skinny and thin and needs to continue to get stronger, and he will, because he's like 19. But like, how do they fit? Obviously a little easier to figure that out with Caleb because he's on a 3-year contract, but Chuma, you kind of got to start making that decision this summer because he's up for an extension. Yeah. Do you like Caleb Houston?
I do. So, I've got to admit, going into this season, I thought Caleb was going to be exclusively in Lakeland. I thought we were going to see him very rarely on the floor for the Magic. Yeah. And maybe that was the plan. And then they had like this unprecedented run of injuries in November, December, and Caleb, ended up playing a lot more than probably, Coach Mosley would have thought, in training camp that he would have. But, there were some rough stretches at the very beginning of the season. But, man, he's really settled in. He's a guy that has thrived going down to Lakeland and getting a lot of minutes and coming back up with the Magic and playing in a limited role. And that's not easy to do. And he, like you said, he's 19. I think he just turned 20. And he did not have the best year at Michigan as a freshman when you think about the expectations, the kind of recruit he was and the kind of high school career he had coming in. And so I didn't really know what to expect, but I didn't think we're going to see him a lot in the NBA. And, he's been better, I think, than advertised. He was always going to be this floor spacer, but I've been really impressed with how tough he's been defensively on the boards. I think the mindset for Houston was that if I'm going to get any minutes and get on the floor, it's going to be because I'm going to have to be, energetic and provide activity and energy. And like the shot, if it goes in, fine. But like, if I'm going to get in Moses' rotation, it's going to be because I have to just work my butt off and outwork people. And so you could definitely kind of see the scraping for minutes and scraping just be on the floor in the NBA, when you watch him play in limited minutes. And so, I think that was for a 2nd round pick. I think that was a solid pick. His best basketball is obviously well ahead of him still. And I think he's in the right place with the Magic to be able to get, his full potential, reached sometime soon. So I've been pretty happy with what I've seen from Caleb. From all accounts that I've heard from Coach Mosley, he's working like crazy in the facility before practice, after practice. The guys in the locker room are a big fan of that young player. And so it seems like, at least right now, that was a home run pick as far as the second round picks go.
I just love what he could potentially be for this team. Obviously there's somewhat of a ceiling there, but like a guy who can come off screens and hit a shot. He can shoot off movement, off the catch. And he's shooting it at a pretty well good rate. Obviously limited minutes, so volume's a little bit on the low side, but I just think like we need shooters. Well, we have one. Let's invest in this guy. It's probably not going to happen because this team's pretty healthy right now, but man, I would love to give him like 12 minutes a night for the rest of the season and just like let him have a consistent role. It's not going to happen, but I feel like that would be so good for his development going into next year when people are trying, this team's going to try and level up. I just feel like it would be such an amazing opportunity for him to have some consistency. It's not going to happen. This is just me pipe dreaming, but it's a fun one. What other storylines, Aaron, do you have in your head for the rest of this season? Doesn't necessarily have to be a margin player, but it could be a core player. Just like, what's another big theme for these remaining 23 games the Magic have?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the reintegration of Jonathan Isaac, into the rotation. They're going to be the organization is going to be ultra conservative and cautious with his minutes and his health and his knee. But eventually, maybe it's not right away, but towards the end of the year, heading into next year, you kind of want to see Jonathan and where he's at with his game, playing alongside guys like Franz and Paulo and Wendell Carter Jr. And really now on the team, the only player that Isaac has played with is Markel. And as we know, like even those minutes were pretty limited. So, they invested, years ago now, they invested in Jonathan Isaac long-term. And, when he's healthy and playing at a high level, we all know what he's capable of defensively. And, that adds another dynamic and wrinkle to this team with Franz and with Paulo. And so I would say just kind of getting him close to back up to speed and comfortable playing with the guys. Like at this point, I think we're all confident saying like Franz is a core guy. Paulo's a core guy. Wendell Carter Jr. is a core guy. And, I feel like Markel is a core guy, although his contract, there is, options in the future. But, how can Orlando Magic, reincorporate Jonathan Isaac into this new young nucleus that the front office has put together? And can we make all the pieces fit here? Because I'm certainly not calling Jonathan Isaac old, but, he's a guy that's been around for a little bit. He's been obviously through a lot, in his short career. And now you've got these 19 and 20-year-olds. I don't mean to dismiss Jalen Suggs. We haven't seen the results on the court from Jalen, and he's had some health issues as well, but they invested the team a top 5 pick in Jalen, so he certainly needs to be in that conversation as well with Franz and with Paulo. Where does Jonathan Isaac fit into this newer, younger nucleus the Magic have assembled? Does he fit? And, is his knee going to be able to stay healthy? And is he going to be able to ultimately stay healthy and be on the floor so that Magic can evaluate what they have in him?
Yeah. No, I get that. He's like, he's been playing roughly like 10, 12 minutes a game. I think he's got like 8 or 10 games now played since his return. Looked, pretty good in most situations. But, it's like what happens to this rotation as he gets stronger and better? And they do need to like bump his minutes up and to an extent to probably continue to evaluate him, or at least, evaluate him. And how he fits with everyone. If that's going to happen, we might see some decreased minutes in Mo Wagner and Bol a bit as J.I. continues to take some more minutes. But Bol's another guy you need to I guess they've seen enough of Bol to where they could probably make some decisions if they needed to on the summer. But like, you don't want to cut him out of the rotation yet. He's still doing well. I think his defense is starting to show a bit more and come back to earth a little bit on some offensive stuff, but he's still an impactful player and a good energy player off the bench. But yeah, like where does JI fit with this team long term? His contract is up at the end of next year. He's got a crazy injury history. And so, like, does he fit with this team? Maybe not. But if not, like, gosh, I hope they don't let this asset, like this player, run until there's no value and hit free agency. Have to deal with it then, or his knee explodes, because, like, you know, there's teams that would probably call this summer for him. So I don't know. I'm not advocating to trade the guy. I just hope they don't wait forever to try and figure it out, you know?
And then one thing really quickly, if I could just kind of jump in,
yeah,
one
absolutely.
Side story is, and I didn't want to forget it, I just reminded myself with Jalen Suggs, you know, the team has invested, you know, a top 5 pick and a very talented and top heavy draft, you know, a couple of years ago, a top 5 pick in Suggs. And you know, I still believe in Jalen Suggs, but what I'd like to kind of see from him, I sort of asked him this question during media day, the preseason, and, you know, maybe I wasn't exactly clear with the way I asked it. It was kind of an awkward question to ask, but like that balance, I want to see him figure it out between going 100 miles an hour, you know, giving that 110% proverbial, versus backing off a little bit to take care of your body. And what I mean by that is Jalen really is that typical football player mentality, you know, physical, so aggressive. But just count the next time the Orlando Magic play, count how many times Jalen Suggs is on the floor. Like, has to be picked up off the ground.
Yeah.
You know, and you hate to see a guy lose that mentality, but he's going to have a short-lived career if he can't stay healthy, right? Your best ability is your availability. And he's got to just maybe through experience find that perfect balance between keep the aggressiveness, but also take care of your body. And, you know, just don't spend the entire night, you know, scraping your knees on the hardwood. And he hits the ground so much. So I'd love to see him. I don't know. What am I trying to say? What's the best way to describe that? Kind of understand your body a little bit and be healthy. You know, we want Jalen to be healthy so he can kind of continue to improve and, you know, be available for the team. And I love his effort. Man, I love his effort. I love his defensive intensity. But, you know, you're not playing football, you're playing basketball, and you can maybe just a little bit dial it back, you know, to take care of your body and be healthy and stuff like that.
No, I agree. And I feel like we've seen a little bit of that recently in like the last 10, 15 games. Maybe not, I don't know. But like, he's never not known how to go 110 miles per hour, like you mentioned. And I always say his offense is going to thrive too with his decision-making and just even his scoring opportunities when he learns to go from 110 to 80. You know, and just be able to like throttle things up a little bit. And that's with, you know, deciding when to jump for a loose ball or not, because not every loose ball needs you to go fly on the ground for it, but also just like your decision making as a ball handler, as a scorer, you know, when you can physically and mentally slow things down. And I think we'll see the physical shift as the mental shift continues to get stronger, and more confident and knowledgeable, I guess. And so I'm hoping we see more of that the rest of the season. Like, it'd be great for him to play 23 more games, end the season healthy, can go into the off season, like ready to train and, you know, take that next step in his game. But I agree with you. Like, there's that full speed throttle physically and mentally has to be something he's got to start to figure out. And maybe we're starting to see glimpses of it. At least I thought we were a few games, you know, towards the end of towards the All-Star break, but maybe not. I got high hopes for him. His defense is amazing. It's the offense that is getting better, but needs to keep coming around. Yeah. So, Aaron, we're going to wrap this up because we've been talking for like 48 minutes. It's late on your side. It's getting late on my side. And I got a little bit more work to do on this end, including editing this up and some work stuff. But what do you think happens with this Magic team to end the year? Do you think they're going to make the play-in? Do you think they're going to be just shy of it? Let's end this conversation with thoughts on the play-in.
It's hard to say. It really kind of depends on health, not just on the other teams that are in the mix as well. I could definitely see the Magic overtaking Indiana in the standings, possibly Chicago. So, right there, if those two things happen, then they're right there. The Magic just outside of the play-in. This team is as healthy as they've been in years. They're young players. Things seem to start to be coming together. J.I. is back. Chuma's coming back. I do think the Magic will make a run of the play-in. My only, I don't want to say concern, but I question, with a little bit of change right before the All-Star break and after, with Mo Bamba out, with Terrence Ross out, with RJ now out, maybe the vibe in the locker room, what's going on right now. I'm sure the guys, it's a very, very, very close, tight-knit locker room. You saw on social media some, warm-hearted, heartfelt goodbyes and stuff like that to some guys that left town. These guys are professionals. That's part of it. I don't think that's going to derail their season because the team trades away a couple of guys that were popular in the locker room. But I do wonder maybe just kind of, the vibes in the locker room where some people are at. But there's just so much talent. It's young, but it's a talented locker room. I do think these last 25 games, the team is going to be competitive, starting with two very important home games coming out of the break, Detroit, Indiana. Those are winnable. Those are kind of, in my mind, winnable must-win home games before you go back on the road. Especially Indiana, because they're right there in front of Orlando in the standings. And so I do think the Magic will be in the conversation. If I had to guess, I would think maybe they finish right along that 10 or 11 line, just in or just outside of the play-in, which, Steven, if you think about where this team has been the last, few years since that trade deadline with Vooch and AG and Fournier, skipping town, that's a great place to be in with a lot of young players and some more draft picks to come.
Absolutely.
It's really hard to answer. The best answer I can give is just say I think they will be in the mix, in the conversation right into the last week of the season, which will produce some really interesting and important games for a team that hasn't had important games in a bit.
I agree. And I'll make my prediction. I don't think the Magic will actually make the play-in. But that's more so not because they're not going to win enough, and more so I think the other teams won't lose enough, particularly. There's 3 teams ahead of them. They'll probably jump 1. I'm not sure they're going to jump 3. But gosh, Aaron, this team is playing meaningful basketball to end the season, and that is more important because they haven't done that in years. And I do believe there is an issue that could be caused with not playing meaningful games for too long and closing up the season too early. And they're not going to experience that. They're going to, push this team and try and win as many games as they can to end the season, from the coaching down to the players. And that's exciting to me, unless they really just sign a ton of guys to these open roster spots. They did sign Admiral Schofield to a regular season deal. So they have one open roster spot. If they just, if they're playing Goga and Admiral and someone else that's not on the team currently, we know there's probably some tanking involved, but I don't expect to see that. That'd be a real shocker at this point. And I'm excited to what these guys can learn on competitive basketball that has meaning for them to end the season. So, and I think that's going to outweigh, losing a couple more games and maybe being one more spot up in the standings and draft night, depending on how the odds fall. So anyways, I'm loving where the Magic are at right now. It's going to be a really fun way to wrap up the season. They have about, I think, 12 or 13 home games left out of the 23 games. So, a pretty good, favorable schedule. They do have a second real hard, long road trip in next month in March, versus the LA teams and whatnot. But it's going to be a fun season, man. I'm really excited. It's a lot different than we've had in a couple of years, Aaron. So With all that being said, Aaron, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show, particularly the late night in Florida. Why don't you remind everyone where they can find you on Twitter and the social networks?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm on Twitter. You can find me at Aaron Goldstone. And, Stephen, again, I just want to thank you for having me on and for all your support. It's been a few years that I've been coming on your show, and you always do a great job. And this is kind of a first class for sure podcast, in the Orlando Magic community. And, I always make time to come on, regardless of what time zone you're in, to talk Magic basketball. And you're a great guy, and this is a quality show. So thanks again for having me, and we'll do it again, sometime soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate y'all, Magic fans. Appreciate you, Aaron. Let's go Magic. Peace.